I was sitting in my home office, reviewing tenant applications for my apartment building, when I heard the aggressive knock on my door. Not the polite tap-tap of a neighbor or the familiar rhythm of a delivery driver. This was the kind of knock that screams, "official business," and makes your stomach drop before you even know why. When I opened the door, two men in cheap suits stood there with clipboards and that particular brand of bureaucratic smugness that immediately puts you on edge. "Are you the current resident of apartment 4B? The taller one asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm the owner of this building," I replied, confused but trying to maintain my composure. "Is there some kind of problem?" The shorter man handed me a manila envelope with all the ceremony of serving a subpoena. "Sir, this is an immediate eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the situation was so absurd that my brain couldn't process it properly. There must be some mistake. I own this building. I've owned it for 8 years. I have the deed, the mortgage payments, the insurance, everything. The tall man consulted his clipboard with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "According to our records, this property has been sold, and the new owners are exercising their right to immediate occupancy. The sale was finalized yesterday." My hands started shaking as I tore open the envelope. The official letterhead was real, the stamps looked legitimate, and there was my address printed in cold, bureaucratic font. But this was impossible. Nobody can sell your property without your knowledge. That's not how real estate works. That's not how any of this works. "Who sold it?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I never put this building on the market. I never signed any papers. I never agreed to any sale." The shorter man shrugged with the kind of indifference that only comes from someone who deals with desperate people all day. "That's between you and your legal representation, sir. Our job is just to deliver the notice. You have until tomorrow at 6 p.m. to remove all personal belongings and surrender the keys." As they walked away, I stood in my doorway clutching the eviction notice, watching them disappear around the corner like some kind of fever dream. 8 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance costs, and sleepless nights dealing with problem tenants. And somehow, according to these papers, none of it mattered anymore. I called my real estate attorney immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I called the county records office, but they were closed for the day. The bank also closed. It was like the entire world had conspired to make this the worst possible timing for a crisis that shouldn't even exist. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by boxes I hadn't packed and stared at the eviction notice until the words blurred together. 24 hours to prove I owned my own home, or lose everything I'd worked for. The clock was ticking, and I had no idea where to even begin. The next morning, I was at the county courthouse before it opened, clutching a folder full of documents and running on about 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline. When the clerk finally unlocked the doors, I practically sprinted to the property records department. "I need to see the ownership history for 1247 Maple Street," I told the clerk, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. She typed into her computer with the speed of continental drift while I drummed my fingers on the counter and watched precious minutes tick away. "Here we go," she said, finally turning her monitor toward me. "The property was transferred yesterday to Meridian Holdings LLC for, wow, that's odd." "What's odd?" I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "The purchase price is listed as $10. That's usually what you see in family transfers or gift situations, but this shows it as a standard sale. $10. Someone had supposedly bought my $400,000 building for $10, and I was just finding out about it now. The signature on the transfer documents looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing anything. The notary stamp was legitimate, dated 3 days ago, a day I distinctly remembered spending at my nephew's birthday party 2 hours out of town. "Can I get copies of everything?" I asked, my hands already reaching for my wallet. While the copies printed, I called my attorney again. This time he answered, and I could hear the confusion in his voice as I explained the situation. "That's impossible, David. You can't sell someone's property without their knowledge. There are safeguards, title searches, insurance requirements. The whole system would have to fail simultaneously. But the system had failed, apparently. The title company that handled the sale was one I'd never heard of, located in a strip mall 40 miles away. The buyer, Meridian Holdings LLC, had been incorporated just 1 week ago according to state records. Everything about this felt wrong, but it was all technically legal on paper. I spent the afternoon driving between offices, collecting documents, and making phone calls. Every conversation led to more questions and fewer answers. The title company claimed they had verified my identity through standard procedures. The notary insisted she remembered me signing the papers, even though I'd never met her in my life. By 4 p.m., I was back home staring at a mountain of paperwork that proved absolutely nothing except that someone had executed a nearly perfect fraud, or that I was losing my mind. The eviction notice deadline was in 2 hours, and I still had no idea who was behind this or how to stop it. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the corner of the original eviction notice, there was a small logo, a simple geometric design that looked familiar but I couldn't place where I'd seen it. I took a photo of it and ran a reverse image search on my phone. The results made my blood run cold. The logo belonged to a company I knew very well, but from a completely different context. Suddenly, the pieces of this impossible puzzle started forming a picture I never could have imagined. The logo belonged to Clearwater Development Group, a company I'd been in bitter negotiations with for the past 6 months. They'd been pressuring me to sell my building so they could tear it down and build luxury condos, but I'd refused every offer. The last time we'd spoken, their representative had gotten nasty, telling me I'd regret being stubborn. I never imagined they meant it literally. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my email history with Clearwater. There it was, a pattern I'd been too focused on the big picture to notice. Every interaction, every document they'd requested, every routine verification they'd asked for had been building toward this moment. They'd been collecting my personal information, my signature samples, my schedule, my habits. The birthday party. They knew I'd be out of town that day because I'd mentioned it during one of our phone calls, complaining about having to reschedule a meeting. They'd probably been watching my building, learning my routines, figuring out exactly when to strike. But how had they pulled off the actual fraud? The notary was real, the documents looked legitimate, and somehow they'd managed to navigate the entire legal system without anyone catching the deception. This wasn't just corporate greed, this was sophisticated criminal conspiracy. I called the police, but the officer who took my report seemed skeptical. So you're saying someone forged your signature to steal your building, but all the paperwork looks legitimate and you can't prove you didn't sign it? He made it sound like I was claiming aliens had abducted my property. I have an alibi for the day it was supposedly signed, I insisted. There are photos, witnesses, receipts. I can prove I was somewhere else. That's something for the courts to sort out, sir. We can take a report, but this sounds more like a civil matter than a criminal one. 1 hour until the eviction deadline, and the police couldn't help me. My attorney was scrambling to file emergency injunctions, but the courts were already closed. The system that was supposed to protect property owners had not just failed, it had been weaponized against me. As I sat in my living room, surrounded by the hasty packing I'd done just in case, I realized that Clearwater hadn't just stolen my building. They'd stolen my faith in the entire concept of ownership, of security, of the idea that following the rules and playing fair would protect you from people who didn't. But I wasn't going down without a fight. If they thought they could intimidate me into walking away quietly, they'd picked the wrong target. I had 1 hour to figure out how to expose their scheme, and I was about to discover that I wasn't the only person they'd targeted. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't leave. Check your basement storage unit. You're not alone in this. The basement storage unit I rarely used was tucked behind the building's utility room, filled mostly with old furniture and boxes of papers I'd been meaning to organize for years. When I unlocked it with the spare key I kept hidden above the doorframe, I expected to find dust and memories. Instead, I found evidence of a conspiracy that made my situation look simple. Spread across a folding table that definitely hadn't been there before were dozens of documents, photographs, and what looked like surveillance equipment. Property deeds, forged signatures, corporate filings, and a detailed timeline that went back 2 years. Someone had been investigating Clearwater Development Group long before they'd targeted me. "You got my text." The voice came from the shadows behind a stack of boxes, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. A woman emerged, mid-40s, wearing jeans and a jacket that had seen better days, with the kind of tired eyes that come from fighting battles nobody else believes are real. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart still hammering from the surprise. "Sarah Chen. I used to own the apartment building 3 blocks from here. Until Clearwater stole it using the exact same method they just used on you." She gestured toward the documents on the table. "You're the 7th property owner they've targeted in this neighborhood. I've been tracking their pattern, building evidence, trying to find someone who wouldn't just take their insurance payout and walk away quietly." I picked up one of the photographs, a surveillance shot of me leaving my building, date stamped from 2 months ago. "They've been watching me for months. They watch everyone. They study your habits, your finances, your personal relationships. They wait until they find the perfect opportunity to strike. When you're out of town, when you're distracted, when the timing gives them the best chance of success." Sarah moved to another section of documents. "Look at this." She showed me a flowchart that mapped out their entire operation. Clearwater would identify properties they wanted, then systematically gather intelligence on the owners. They had connections with corrupt notaries, title companies that didn't ask too many questions, and legal firms that specialized in making fraud look legitimate. Most importantly, they had someone inside the county records office who could fast-track their fake transactions. "The county clerk who helped you yesterday?" Sarah asked. "She's been feeding them information for over a year. Every property search, every document request, every owner who comes in asking questions, she reports it all back to them." My eviction deadline was in 20 minutes, but suddenly that seemed less important than the bigger picture Sarah was showing me. "Why haven't you gone to the FBI? This is massive fraud." I tried. We all tried. But look at the paper trail they've created. Everything appears legitimate on the surface. They've gamed the system so perfectly that proving fraud requires resources none of us have individually. That's why I've been waiting for the right person to help me build a case that's too big to ignore. She handed me a thick folder. Every victim, every forged document, every connection between Clearwater and their network of accomplices. "With your case as the most recent example, we finally have enough to prove the pattern. But we need to move fast. They're planning to demolish your building next week." The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours ago, I'd been worried about losing my property. Now I was part of a criminal investigation that could bring down an entire network of real estate fraud. But first, I had to survive the next 20 minutes without getting arrested for trespassing in my own building. "There's something else you need to know," Sarah said as I flipped through the evidence. "Clearwater didn't choose these properties randomly. There's a reason they want this specific neighborhood, and it's bigger than just luxury condos. The reason Clearwater wanted our neighborhood had nothing to do with real estate development, and everything to do with what was buried beneath it." Sarah pulled out a geological survey that had been mysteriously excluded from public records, a survey that showed substantial mineral deposits running directly under our buildings. Not gold or silver, but something much more valuable in today's market: rare earth elements essential for manufacturing computer chips and electric car batteries. "The city approved a mining operation 6 months ago," Sarah explained, pointing to a map that showed the exact boundaries of the planned excavation. "But they needed clear title to all the properties in this zone before they could begin. Clearwater wasn't buying buildings to develop, they were stealing them to strip mine underneath." The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. City council members, county officials, title companies, notaries, and even the police officer who dismissed my case earlier, they were all connected to either Clearwater or the mining company that hired them. What I'd thought was simple real estate fraud was actually the systematic theft of an entire neighborhood for corporate profit. But Sarah had been building more than just evidence. She'd been building a network of victims, journalists, and honest officials who were ready to expose the truth. The text she'd sent me wasn't just about finding allies, it was about timing the revelation for maximum impact. In about 5 minutes, your eviction deadline will pass and Clearwater will technically take possession of your building, she said, checking her watch. That's also when federal agents will be executing search warrants on every property they've fraudulently acquired, every business they're connected to, and every official they've corrupted. As if on cue, my phone started buzzing with news alerts. Breaking, multi-million-dollar real estate fraud ring exposed. Federal agents raid development company offices. City officials arrested in mining rights conspiracy. The knock on my door this time was different, professional but not threatening. When I opened it, a woman in a FBI windbreaker smiled and showed me her badge. "Mr. Davidson? I'm Agent Rodriguez. We have some good news about your property ownership situation." The next few hours were a blur of interviews, evidence collection, and paperwork that actually worked in my favor for once. By midnight, I had my building back, along with documentation that I'd been the victim of a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond anything I could have imagined. But the real revelation came 3 weeks later, when the full scope of the investigation became public. The mining operation wasn't just about rare earth elements. It was about controlling the supply chain for a new type of battery technology that would revolutionize energy storage. Clearwater wasn't just stealing buildings, they were trying to corner the market on the future of renewable energy. The neighborhood they'd targeted would have been destroyed, the residents displaced, and billions of dollars in mineral wealth extracted by a company that had built their entire business model on systematic fraud. If Sarah hadn't been tracking their pattern, if I hadn't refused to be intimidated, if that county clerk hadn't gotten greedy and sloppy with her record-keeping, they might have succeeded. Today, I still own my building. Sarah got hers back too, along with substantial compensation for her investigative work. The mining rights were transferred to a legitimate company that's working with the community to ensure fair compensation and environmental protection. And sometimes, late at night, I still can't quite believe that an eviction notice served to the owner of the building, was actually the key to exposing one of the largest real estate fraud conspiracies in state history. The knock that changed everything turned out to be exactly that, just not in the way I expected.